Ready for a deep dive. This one takes us into Socialist China.
Socialist China.
But not the way you might picture it. We're talking art, specifically 1949 to 1979.
Okay.
And our guide is Art and Modernism in Socialist China. Unexplored International Encounters, 1949-1979.
Right.
Because forget that image of just like Soviet-style realism. It gets so much more interesting.
Yeah, it really does. It's this period is full of these global connections artistically, which is not something people often think about, you know?
Yeah, you think of it as very insular, but
Exactly.
let's jump right into it with a Chilean mural in Cuba. This is where things get kind of wild.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is the Camilo Cienfuegos mural by Jose Venturelli. And it's this massive work, Scenes from the Cuban Revolution.
Oh.
Now, what's interesting is Venturelli himself was influenced by Mexican muralists.
Oh, wow.
Like, so Carolus, so you've already got this lineage.
It's not just the imagery, it's the style that's traveled.
Exactly. So then picture this, 1962 China. Huge pro-Cuba rallies happening in Beijing.
Yeah.
And photos of this mural, this big dynamic thing, are on display. And for Chinese artists seeing this, it was like a spark. Especially Zhang Kaili,
Wow.
who then starts exploring large-scale murals himself.
It's like the perfect timing. You almost wonder, did the organizers KNOW, you know? Like,
Yeah.
This will plant a seed.
It really speaks to how exhibitions were used in this diplomatic way.
Fascinating.
Another example, the 1950s Shuyu exhibition. Now, he was Japanese,
Okay.
heavily inspired by Chinese INK painting, even traveled to China centuries earlier.
Oh, wow. Full circle.
This is right after World War II.
Very tense.
Sino-Japanese relations are icy. So China emphasizes how Sesshu, though Japanese, reflects their traditions.
Right.
It's this easing of tension through art, you know?
It's fascinating, and sometimes those exchanges ruffled feathers a bit, right? Like the Romanian painting class in the early 60s.
Yes, the Eugen Popa situation. Okay, so after that Sino-Soviet split, China's looking for new partnerships, even in art. Popa, he's European-trained, kind of modernist,
Okay.
seems ideal.
They brought in someone to shake things up?
In a way, yes, but some of his teaching, notably using a female nude model, raised eyebrows.
Oh, I bet.
This is still a conservative society. Art's supposed to reflect that.
Right, where's the heroic worker, you know?
Exactly. But that approach, even if seen as scandalous, did have impact.
Sure.
Like ripples in a pond.
And speaking of ripples, 1960, British modern art is exhibited.
Right.
You wouldn't think Cold War that would go over well.
Right. And it was a significant collection. Grant, even Lucian Freud were in it.
Wow.
Very mixed response. Someone like Wu Zorin, he'd studied in Europe, saw it as learning,
Okay.
even praised some abstract artists like Henry Moore.
It's not a rejection of Western influence outright. It's more like if you've seen it.
Precisely. But others, baffled, offended even. It challenged how they understood art's purpose.
Right. Makes you wonder what other subversive readings were happening, not officially acknowledged. But this wasn't one way. 1956, Italian artists go to China.
Fascinating time for both.
Right, both kind of figuring themselves out.
Italy's post-war, grappling with realism versus abstraction. China wants a better image internationally,
Makes sense.
especially the Soviet Union's getting colder towards them.
So both sides had things to gain from this exchange.
Absolutely. Italians see China few did. China builds alliances, and it's during their 100 Flowers campaign. A brief openness.
It's like all these things had to line up just right.
It really is.
And one of the coolest outcomes, a collaborative hand scroll.
Yes. This shows the blend beautifully.
Okay.
They use the format of a yaji, like an elegant gathering painting,
Okay.
which was a literati thing, the educated class, in pre-communist China.
So they're reclaiming it from the feudal past, using it for modern diplomacy.
Exactly. The symbolism is so layered.
What's on the scroll, though? Like, what did they paint?
Oh, it's this mix of the Chinese and Italian styles. A true fusion. It's actually held by descendants of Wu Zorin now, one of the artists involved.
I'd love to see that in person. But speaking of bridging worlds, Huang Binhong,
Oh, yes.
already a master of Guowa, the ink painting style, even before 49.
And not just any Guo artist. He was pushing boundaries within that,
Yeah.
incorporating modernist elements. So talk about a tightrope to walk your artistic vision versus a political climate that's not into deviation.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's really something. Amazing how he managed it, really. It's like he walked that line so well. even gained international recognition.
Which is nuts, given how restricted artists were.
Right, it's a few things, I think. His work, while new, wasn't overtly political, you know?
Okay.
More about form, style, within that Gowa tradition.
So it's more palatable to those scared of Western influence.
Yeah, like some abstract art today, it's the feeling, not a literal object, you know?
Right. It's the art itself.
And he had allies, like the critic Foulet. Organized Huang's first solo show in the PRC, even...
Oh, wow. So someone was watching out for him.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
But this international thing, we're not just talking China here.
Oh, bigger than that.
Exhibitions in Soviet satellite countries, even Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher, was into his work. It transcended the politics.
It really shows how much more there is to this period than people realize. It's not a monolith.
Not at all.
And artists found ways to connect with a global audience, even then.
Speaking of finding a voice, Tan Huamu's work is fascinating.
Oh,
right?
totally. His pictorial diaries, they're like little glimpses into life then.
Yeah.
He'd sketch so quickly, everyday people, almost like a journalist with a visual eye.
You're right there beside them.
Exactly. People doing Kaigong, kids, daily stuff brought to life.
But he didn't shy away from the bigger events either, right? The Smashing Sparrows campaign, he sketched that.
Yeah, and those are so interesting because there's no outright criticism, but you see it, you know?
The absurdity.
Yeah, these young people caught up in it. There's this irony in how he draws them. He's making you think, not telling you what to think.
Subtle but powerful.
Not all artists were content with subtle, though. Huang Jimbo comes to mind.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about an artist wrestling with expression in a system that wants the opposite.
Right, he's very influenced by the West, right? German expressionism, all that.
Big time, yeah. Which clashes with the favored socialist realism.
It's almost funny to say that when you look at a piece like Barbed Wire, you know?
Right.
It's raw, almost violent in the lines, nothing idealized about it.
He'd seen the struggles firsthand, working class, and he put that in his art.
Even if it meant being called formalist, putting style over.
Substance.
Right, which seems ridiculous given how much emotion is there.
It's that tension, though, that defines so much of the art of this time.
Individual versus the collective.
Exactly. And it wasn't just painters. Dai Alien, in the dance world, same struggle.
Oh, right, she'd trained in England, right. Ballet.
Classically trained, and comes back to China with this idea. Blend that with Chinese tradition. New form of dance.
Bold move for that era.
Oh yeah, huge suspicion of anything Western. But she wanted to prove Chinese culture could be modern.
That it didn't have to choose, right.
Exactly. And her choreography, it was unlike anything else.
What does she do?
Folk dance, opera, even martial arts got woven in. She owned her heritage while doing something new.
Redefining what modern dance even means, almost.
And it worked. She toured like crazy. China, Europe, Southeast Asia, even the Soviets. She was cultural diplomacy in action.
Showing a different side of China.
And her reach went beyond dance even. Ye Qianyu, the artist, he was captivated by her.
He's the one who did both, right? Ink painting and Western oils.
Exactly. He loved how expressive Dai Alien was. Grace and D-strength.
Yeah.
You see it in how he draws, paints her, often in these incredible costumes.
Like he saw in her the same fusion she was creating on stage.
A beautiful example of that cross-pollination, you know, artists pushing each other.
And speaking of pushing, Zhang Ding is fascinating because he brings in such different things.
He was a bit of a rebel, yeah. Bold colors, experimenting, even the term decorative pictures is his.
And the Picasso influence is clear.
Oh, huge. Cubism, that playfulness of form, it's all over Zhang Ding's rooster paintings, especially...
Tell me about those, because the rooster itself is already so symbolic.
Right. New dawn, brighter future, it's all there. But Zhang Ding's roosters, they're F-U-N-N-Y, too.
He's not taking himself too seriously.
Exactly. The colors, the way he distorts things, it's like he's winking at you.
I'm working within the system, but I'm gonna have fun with it.
And he blends it seamlessly with the folk art, too, so it's got that Chinese flavor.
He's not imitating Picasso, he's having a conversation with him.
And that's what makes it so interesting. It's that exploration, that drive we've been talking about this whole time.
Finding their own way, even when things say you can't.
Exactly. It's inspiring, really.
It's amazing to see how these artists found their voice within a system that often felt restrictive.
It really is. They were drawing from tradition, experimenting, finding influence in the most unexpected places.
And it makes you think about the legacy of all this, you know? And there's one more connection. Might seem odd at first.
Right.
Monumental Mao. and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in D.C.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a juxtaposition.
Right. Because what does a champion of civil rights have to do with these huge statues of Mao Zedong? On the surface, total opposites.
Completely different ideologies, yeah.
And yet, when it came out that the sculptor for the King Memorial, Li Yixin,
Right.
he'd trained in China, done tons of Mao statues.
Of course it's going to cause a stir.
Huge debate, people outraged. Like, how can you have an artist who depicted what many see as authoritarianism create a monument to freedom?
It's that question of, can the art be separated from the system, you know?
People were calling for boycotts, saying a Chinese artist shouldn't even...
Right, and you can see how that taps into anxieties about China more broadly, too.
Oh, totally. It became about way more than just one sculpture.
Exactly. It became this whole political thing.
But, like we've been saying, it's rarely that simple.
Never is, especially with art.
And to focus just on where Li Yixin trained, you miss this long tradition of monumental sculpture itself.
Right. This isn't unique to China.
We do it too. Washington, Lincoln, even back in Europe with kings and whatnot.
The big figures, meant to inspire awe, it's a global language in a way.
Even if they represent different values, different everything.
Exactly. So Li Yixin sculpting King, he's drawing on that, not just replicating Mao.
Right. It's not a one-to-one thing.
And I think that's important to remember. To assume his king would be Mao in a suit, it misses how style works.
You can't just put artists in boxes based on their background.
Exactly. Their skill, their message, that's what matters.
So this whole controversy, it kind of proves the point of these deep dives, doesn't it?
In a way, yeah. We oversimplify, assume art from one place can't speak to another.
But in Socialist China, we've seen how interconnected things really were.
Even with the politics, yeah.
And these artists, they found ways to speak up, push back, even when subtle.
It makes you think, what LSE is out there that we just assume we know, you know?
That's what I love about this. It's not about answers. It's about going, what if?
And that's what keeps it exciting. There's always more to uncover.
So, to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time for another adventure into art and history.